Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome Leon Tribe, a longtime Microsoft MVP and Dynamics CRM 365 expert. When he's not working for clients in his native Australia, Leon can be found on his own blog writing about topics that he finds interesting, like workflow, the CRM industry landscape, and agile project management. We'll talk about a little of each of those here today, so thanks for joining. Hey, Leon Tribe, welcome to the podcast today. Thanks for joining me.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Jason.
So, just for anyone listening today, I'm talking to you from the U.S. and you are in lovely Sydney, Australia, right?
Yeah, Sydney, Australia. A bit cloudy today, but otherwise, yeah, it's not a bad city.
It must be warming up now as I'm adding layers and layers to my wardrobe every day. You must be getting more and more pleasant.
Yeah, it's certainly in the 80s to convert it to
Fahrenheit. Well done on the fly there.
No worries. And it'll get up by summer. There'll be a few days where it hits 100, without a doubt.
Yeah, sure.
So it gets pretty warm in Sydney, and it's humid as well, unfortunately. So we all have air conditioners. But at the moment, it's not too bad. Today's in the let's do the conversion in the sort of the mid 70s, so it's not too bad.
That doesn't sound bad. I had ice on the grass today, just by comparison.
So. Oh wow!
Yeah.
We're coming over to your side of the world. My children have never seen snow, which obviously some people find quite surprising. But growing up in Sydney, it doesn't snow here, so my kids are quite excited. We're heading over to the US in a week or so, and they're really looking forward to seeing snow. I've seen it before, and I know how cold it is, so
yeah,
I think they're looking because they've never experienced it.
I was actually in New York City for a snowstorm last winter, and it's a special kind of mess you get. It's kind of magical and looks really, really cool, and it's very memorable. But it's also a special kind of mess you get, like in the middle of a city in a snowstorm. So I hope you get a little of the experience, but not too much of it, I guess.
Thank you, much appreciated.
So I wanted to leap into things here. You've been very busy covering really interesting topics on your blog, and I thought we'd really maybe just talk about some of those subjects for the next bit of time here, just to learn a little bit more. Most recently, to start, I wanted to talk about some of the analyst reports you have been following, both the most recent ones, and I know you follow them over time, which is really great. And I love the visualizations that you provide to your readers, where you sort of track the path that a vendor follows in either Gartner's Magic Quadrant, chart, or in the Forrester Wave, sort of over time, which I love, and I haven't seen anywhere else shared externally, so those are, I find, really nice.
I've never seen it done anywhere else, but it just seems like an interesting thing to do for a blog, so sort of did it once and sort of keep doing it every time they bring out a report.
Do you ever get any feedback from vendors about your your thoughts on where these things are going?
No, I haven't.
They don't call up and argue with you?
No, not even Microsoft. I've talked to Microsoft, certainly the product team, reasonably frequently. But yeah, no, they've never said you should talk more about this or talk about this. I've never really had direct feedback. Generally, I'm reflecting what's in the reports, so I'm not too controversial in those ones. In my financial analysis, Salesforce side, arguably a bit more controversial.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, the trajectories are more just sort of creating a Cliff Note version of the report itself and showing the sort of the path they're going on. But yeah, no, I've never had direct feedback.
Well, tracking those charts does, I mean, you can take it for what it's worth, I suppose, with analysts and their assessments, and sort of how fine-grained are they really sort of moving those levers, and how well are they able to really assess some of these differences? I often wonder,
Sure.
if it moves 1/20th of the height of the chart, is that really measuring anything or not? Or is it just sort of
right.
Are they sort of moving them relative to each other more? Is it more of that? It's obviously.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
But
yeah, no, it absolutely is, because there's no numbers on the scales, right? So it's they're talking these sort of broad terms of leadership and vision and ability to execute, and they're talking these sort of non-quantifiable concepts. So it's certainly I try to focus it more on relative to each other rather than as a sort of an absolute value, and probably focus on which quadrant the ones are falling in and out of,
Yeah, I mean,
which
the,
yeah, quite interesting.
the Gartner versus Forrester are they're coming up with a little bit different conclusions, I would say, on their Salesforce automation analysis these days. Are you noting any, I don't know, any big differences that people are that you think are worth noting between the two?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the big difference because the reports came out June, July. So the Forrester one came out in June, I believe, from memory, and the Gartner one came out in July. So they're relatively close to each other. So they're effectively assessing the same products. But there was a fundamental difference, certainly between Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM, and Salesforce in terms of positioning. So Forrester has now got Microsoft above Salesforce. So they're seeing Microsoft as the leader in the industry now. Gartner has Microsoft catching up, but still has Salesforce ahead in terms of sort of the ultimate position. So they're both slightly different in that regard. Probably the other difference is in terms of the other older players, so your SAPs and Oracles. So Gartner has Oracle making a comeback into the quadrant. So that'll be interesting to see how the new online play for Oracle pans out. But Gartner's seeing them as being relevant again, whereas Forrester is a little bit more dismissive of the SAPs and Oracles and some of the older players.
Yeah, and I'm looking here. I mean, they seem to put at least one Oracle product right. Oh, Forrester does right up near Microsoft and Salesforce. But I would say it does seem like Gartner is a lot less confident in their ranking. It's
Mm.
I always struggle with what else to really take from just the graphics on these, because if you're a company looking to invest in Salesforce automation, uh, and you actually go and do an assessment, you could come up with a like, because you make the point of some of the up and coming or the very successful industry plays, which could also be in your own company's Magic Quadrant. That could be right at the top next to just Dynamics or just Salesforce. It's really hard to
Mm.
get too much further into it, I think, as an individual company. But certainly, I guess you wouldn't be fired for considering anything in that quadrant, right?
No, anything in the top right quadrant, they're going to be providing similar functionality. The way I normally characterize it is, it's not so much that one product's better than the other when you're up in that top quadrant. It's more what's going to suit your organization, your ecosystem. So if you're heavily involved with the Office 365 products, if you're heavily using Microsoft products, then probably the Microsoft product's going to be a better fit, right? Microsoft's renowned for having all its products integrate. If you have less of that, if you're more sort of a Google shop, maybe a sort of Apple shop, that kind of thing, then maybe it's worth considering Salesforce. Maybe that'll suit your business better. So in terms of what's in that quadrant, they do pretty similar things. It's just a case of looking at price and looking at how it's going to fit to your overall IT strategy.
Another point that you have raised, I think, is pretty interesting, is how Salesforce has, and I don't know, maybe you've seen this out in competitive situations, how they've used certain messaging or certain I'm not sure what you call it, FUD or certain lines of argument to try to outmaneuver Microsoft or Microsoft partners around certain elements of performance, or whatever kind of element. And I don't know if you feel this way, but I don't know if Microsoft or Microsoft partners maybe use those tactics as much. But it's funny how they can kind of change based on sort of analyst assessments over time, and it sounds like those points might be shifting yet again with these latest analyst views.
Yeah, so the big one there is probably right regards to the concept of value. So consistently, the Microsoft offering, Dynamics 365 or the Dynamics CRM, is cheaper. There's no question that if you do an apples to apples comparison of functionality of Salesforce to the Microsoft product, it's a cheaper product. Microsoft normally comes in sort of around, say, half the price, 2/3 of the price, things like this. So generally in a sales scenario, Salesforce will shift it to a value conversation. They'll say, they might be cheaper, we offer more value. This is what they say. It's not necessarily what they deliver. One of the damning statements in the Gartner report is they in the report they say they've spoken to customers, and one of the things that Salesforce customers struggle to find is value in the product. They struggle to extract the value from the software they've bought. So the fact that Gartner have called that out is quite damaging, certainly to the pre-sales activities of Salesforce. So yeah, it's quite a damning statement from Gartner that says that people that purchase Salesforce struggle to derive that value because this is a key part of their pre-sales positioning.
So another element I've always thought about is, seeing Microsoft and Salesforce so close together in these reports over time, and I mean, you can sort of show it, and we'll link back to the blog post where you do this analysis. Is that it doesn't seem to have really moved the needle in terms of market share. I know it's not maybe I'm not sure. I don't think this is actually in the reports from the analysts or anything, but in numbers I've heard, I don't see Microsoft's, even though they're sort of very close to on par and probably deserving of an evaluation as often as Salesforce is for most, especially on the larger, mid-sized to lower enterprise side. I am surprised that they haven't gained any market share or considerable market share over the last few years. And this maybe ties in with the other analysis that you love to do, which is the sort of Salesforce earnings rundowns that you do, but Salesforce just continues to grow very, very steadily, and that seems to be making their shareholders and the financial analysts happy.
Yeah, Salesforce throw a lot of money at sales and marketing to the detriment of their profit. So they've started in the last couple of quarters to make a little bit of a profit, like 1% profit, fractions of a percent profit. But historically, where the money goes is sales and marketing. And Mark Benioff has been very clear on this, that he feels it's better to try and gain market share than it is to make a profit at this point in Salesforce's lifespan, if you like, or this point in their life. So yeah, Salesforce has been basically buying market share quite aggressively. Microsoft, hasn't been playing that game. So I think they've been growing. I haven't seen a lot of market share reports out there. They do come out occasionally. I think they're growing, but certainly they don't have the same level of market share as Salesforce. In terms of growth, I'm not sure what the growth rate is for Microsoft in terms of market share, but Salesforce certainly have got a very strong focus on buying as much of the market as they can, to the detriment of the finances.
Yeah, and I always find it hard, honestly, to compare too much, because once you start looking a little bit lower down at what these two different companies are doing in terms of selling CRM software, I mean, Salesforce is, as an organization, is almost 100% tuned toward CRM product development, marketing, sales. That's what they do. For Microsoft, since it's one component of just this behemoth of a company with so many interests, and the way they go to market, and the way they're either their own account reps or partners engage with accounts. They're just they diverge so quickly that it's very. I always find it a little bit sort of mind scrambling to try to make sense of the differences especially like when you hear partners. I was listening in on a conversation at a conference about partners' experiences selling Salesforce, selling against Salesforce with Dynamics CRM or Dynamics 365, and I'm sorry, no, it was an ISV talking to partners about their experience dealing with Salesforce-based deals versus Dynamics-based deals. That's what it was, and just how different the companies are, that the way they interact. They're dealing with different roles, whether it's Salesforce versus Dynamics, like an IT team versus a sales manager kind of a thing on the Salesforce client side, and just how different those interactions are and the buying patterns are when it comes to like either the CRM itself or the add-ons. And I always end up walking away sort of scratching my head thinking like, are they there's definitely people on the ground competing, especially for partners, but they're such different stories. It seems like.
Yeah, the sales model for the two companies is very different. So in the case of Salesforce, basically Salesforce make the sales. So Salesforce have got a large sales team. Again, that's where a lot of the sales and marketing cost goes. It's supporting that team, paying them commissions, and they're very controlled in the way they sell. So they basically, if you join Salesforce, I've got friends which have in their wisdom have gone to Salesforce. They basically go to like a Salesforce university, and they're taught the formula for selling Salesforce. So there's very much a formula. There's very much a method to the way they do it, and they control it. They're very controlling of that method, right? So there's a script you follow. You don't deviate from the script. This is how you talk about Salesforce. This is how you sell it, and they're very focused on that. Microsoft's model's different, right? Microsoft doesn't really sell direct. So Microsoft relies on the partner channel to do the selling. So they don't have as much control of that sales process. And so it's generally up to the individual partner to work out how they're going to approach the job, how they're going to sell it. So I imagine it will be quite different for the ISVs. In the case of Microsoft, the people that have sold the product, it's probably the people they're interacting with, right? The Microsoft partner. And in the case of Salesforce, generally when Salesforce have finished the sale, then they hand it over to a Salesforce partner to implement. So it could be that the ISV is talking to the Salesforce partner, and the partner doesn't yet have a history with that client, and that might be quite surprising to the ISV. But once you understand the sales models, it makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, I wanted to change direction a little bit because you clearly have your mind on some different things. This competitive analysis is one, and it's great, and I certainly look forward to seeing where it goes next. But you've also been sort of dipping your toe recently into a couple of other interesting things. One of them is Microsoft Flow, and you're not just dipping your toe in;
Yeah.
you're sort of rolling it around and seeing how you can either use it or make it blow up. I think is, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, it's my new favorite toy. Yeah, that's traditionally in my blog I've tried to suck the marrow out of workflow. This
Yeah.
is sort of the next generation of workflow. So this is now my new toy to suck the marrow out of. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I saw when I saw the post about linking IFTTT with Flow. I was like, "Oh, Leon, what are you doing?"
Yeah,
Like,
no, I did a presentation on Flow recently, and I made the statement because it's very true. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should do.
uh,
It demonstrates the flexibility and power of the product. In terms of an enterprise implementation, yeah, I'm not sure I'll be linking if this then that to Flow to make something happen via email, because the connective tissue I'm using between the two is an email in that blog. But yeah, certainly it's a very powerful tool, and what's good for me is you don't need code, right? So it's a completely configurable tool. I literally learned it in an afternoon. So I thought, all right, I better get my head across this product. By the end of the afternoon, I'd created my first flow. It was working. By the end of the next day, I'd created one for the project that I was working on. Very friendly tool. I used to code a long time ago. I used to code in C. That's how long ago it was.
yeah.
But these days, I'm pure config, and Flow just plays to my strengths in that regard. It's a purely configurable product. It's great.
And that's interesting that you actually brought it to bear in a project, because I've had some. I think it's a really cool tool, and I know a lot of Dynamics professionals are actually pretty excited about it, like you are, and
Mm.
others too in the CRM space, especially. Um, but I've also heard. I think I even did. It even came up in a previous podcast with some of the folks from the FastPath team who are all about security and audit, and they may they. If you listen to a story from security experts for and some of the horror stories, the idea of letting some of the capabilities of flow loose in an enterprise situation can sound a little scary, and just high risk, I guess. Um, are there any scenarios that you found? Well, I guess you mentioned there is at least one. Can you talk about some of the ones that you've had your eye on that you think could be good use cases for deploying a flow?
Yeah. So the beauty of Flow is it's very powerful. The problem with Flow is it's very powerful. So,
Yeah, right.
if someone gets hold of it, and if there's not good governance in place, they can use up all your flow. Yeah, because you get so many flow actions a month, basically. So it's very easy for someone to write a bad flow that loops, and suddenly it gobbles up the entire enterprise's flows. Fortunately, Microsoft, as well as handing out the tools, have now put out some governance structures around it. So it's possible to put some governance around the product, make sure people only use flow in certain ways, and so on and so forth. If you get the sort of the premium level of flow, you can start managing it as an enterprise tool. So it's not as fast and loose as it once was. But where I see flow doing really well in an organization is for those simple integrations, or for those simple processes where you've got to go outside of CRM. So for workflow, so CRM workflow is really great for handling processes within CRM. All right, so if you have a case, and then when the case does something, we've got to send an email over here, and we've got to create a record over there, and those kinds of sort of simple internal within CRM scenarios, workflow does the job. Where flow can help is if you then have to talk to SharePoint, or if you then have to extract an email and do something with it from your Exchange server. And so it just sort of provides that ability to access externally. Would I use Flow for a full-on integration between CRM and another product, say an ERP or something? Probably not. If it was a Dynamics, I can see Microsoft would like to make an argument that Flow is the new tool combined with common data services that we should be using to integrate stuff, and with Logic Apps as the sort of the extension of that. But for me, certainly at the moment, I'd be using it for those simple extensions to process and those simple integrations. The other thing that Flow's got is it's got an approval process built in. So if you need to build an approval process, you can do it in workflow, but it's not straightforward. You gotta sort of be a bit creative with workflow. With Flow, there's basically a defined approval process built into the system, so it's very easy to have something happen in CRM that triggers an email, which then gets someone to go to the Flow approval, they approve, and then so on and so forth. So it's much easier to build an approval process in Flow than it is in workflow. The CRM tip of the day, I'm going to give a plug to George Davinsky's CRM tip of the day. They say if you can do it in workflow, do it in workflow, and if you can't, consider Flow. That's their rule. That's true, and then they extended the rule and say unless it's easy to do it in Flow, and things like that approval process. That's one of the sort of the exceptions where it's actually a little bit easier to do that in Flow than probably it is in workflow. But it's a great little configurable tool, just for those extensions outside of CRM, and if you need to do a simple integration between, say, email and CRM.
Have you had to deal with any of the let's say, I don't know, error handling or auditing or any of those things? Have those come up as a concern ever?
It's a good question, because you get all the power and none of the responsibility with Flow. It's very easy to build a quick flow, but then not consider things like error handling scenarios, consider sort of which account you're using, what access do they have, and all those important things that we should do when we build stuff for CRM, when we build extensions and build add-ons. The scenario that I describe in my blogs is a pretty simple one. I don't do a lot of error handling in that. Ultimately, it didn't need it. So the scenario in the blog was people were scanning a document, they were emailing it, and then Flow would pick up the attachments in the email and put them into a SharePoint folder. Because it was a sort of a closed loop with the one user, and they know if it didn't appear, they would just look at see what they put in, and they'd rescan it. And the way we'd configure the Flow, all the documents that didn't end up against the CRM record ended up in a sort of common repository. Error handling wasn't as strong in that one. But if you're doing something real and it's got multiple people involved, and you don't want to drop the ball on a process, so something like an approval process, for example, would be a good example of that. You've got to think about these things like error handling. You've got to think about, what service accounts am I using? Is there a security implication here? All that important governance stuff that we need to do in any kind of development, right? So people make the distinction between sort of development and things like Flow, the customization, configuration, sorry. But to me, they're one and the same. They're all us extending CRM. Whether there's a layer in front of the code or not, we're still extending CRM. So the same principles apply regardless of the tool we're using.
Well, it's certainly encouraging to see that there's elements of flow that are going to support, like you wrote about a import, like sort of controlling a flow and sort of being able to import it into different environments for CRM, for example. I think that's promising to me. It's I would take that as Microsoft perhaps just sort of adapting the way, trying to figure out how people really want to work with it, and adapting that, because I don't remember them talking about sort of making flow into something more enterprise worthy or enterprise hardened when they first launched it. That didn't seem to be sort of part of the vision, but that seems to be the direction they're moving it now. I don't know if you have the same take.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, when it first came out, it was all about giving people pretty tools, but not sort of thinking about it in the larger context of a sort of a software development life cycle, software deployment scenarios, and things like that. I know those tools are now coming. We've now got the governance tools, so you can ring fence where the data goes when people use Flow. With the premium account, you can export your flow and then import it into another environment. You get a sandbox with the premium version. They're starting to bring in elements which you would want, right? So, and then there's other products where they need to sort of pick this up as well. So Crm Portals is a good example where it's difficult to move. So say you create a form in Crm Portals, it's difficult to move that to another environment. You have to go to things like the XRM toolkit to make that happen. Microsoft haven't provided those tools directly. I think Microsoft's starting to realize that it's well and good providing these tools, but we gotta make it easier. We've got to make it friendlier for the developers and the configurers as well, so they can sort of implement them as part of their projects and not cause themselves too much mischief. I think Microsoft is starting to realize that.
Yeah, when I first saw demos of Flow, and it was sort of like an individual user owned, like their own flow, it was sort of like, boy, that seems pretty limited. It's definitely cool, but it's just so limited in what you can really do with that in a in a corporate environment or a government environment or anything like that. It sounds like some of those limitations are some of the ones that seem to be going away or seem to be getting addressed, which is good. I think it makes
Yeah,
sense if they want to make that, keep it part of the story and make it uh, you know believable,
yeah. And
for lack
my
of a better
philosophy
word.
with Flow is to treat it like workflow,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So in Dynamics 365 CRM, we've got the ability to give anyone the power to build a workflow. Generally, I don't. Generally, I say no. Look, let's keep that to the power users. Flow's a little
yeah.
powerful. You can cause a lot of mischief very quickly if you build the wrong flow, wrong workflow, and delete all your data, or do something crazy like that. So I think Flow's exactly the same. You just got to um, try and keep it limited to being used by the power users and the administrators, and it's not really a tool for the general user.
Um, do you have any predictions about where you might look next to use it, either just for fun in a blog or in a real business scenario?
The thing I'm trying to get working at the moment is the ability to create custom connectors. So with the Flow Premium account, you can create your own triggers and actions, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So on the project I'm currently working on, it's an Agile project, and we're using Jira a lot. And there is a Jira connection for Flow, but it doesn't quite do everything I want it to do. So I want to extend it. So at the moment I'm beating my head against creating these custom connections. I've learned all sorts of things. I've learned about OData and REST endpoints and all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, which I kind of could talk about in pre-sales before, but I hadn't really got my hands too dirty with. So that's sort of the next challenge, is try and link Jira up to Excel via Flow using a custom connector. And if I achieve that, I'll be very happy, and I'll certainly blog about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because Jira does. I was actually just working with Jira, and it does have an OData interface, I believe, right? So you can.
It does. It's not the friendliest, and
Uh,
they actively keep it difficult, but it does have one. You're right.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are always fun challenges. Cool. Yeah. Well, I look forward to hearing where that goes for sure. So I guess the last thing I did want to just learn a little more about was some of the real work, real work, for lack of a better word, that you're doing, the stuff that pays the bills. And I know because you've also written about it to an extent, and can talk to it to some extent. But like you just mentioned, you've been involved in a really significant project that has been, I guess, adhering to agile principles to a really large extent, and that's yielded really good results. Yeah, can you give our listeners a little update on what that's all about?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been working over a year now, so it's probably getting closer to 18 months on a project for one of the larger universities in Australia, one of the two major ones in Sydney. I can't. The KPMG risk will spank me if I name them, but yeah, a large university, a large state university, we'll say that. But yeah, we're implementing Dynamics 365 basically to handle two things at the moment. It's continually expanding, which the joy of Agile is it adapts to that very well. But primarily, there's two foci at the moment for the implementation. One is for student support, so student case management, if you like, through the multi-channels that the university supports. So it's face-to-face, it's phone, it's web forms, it's email, all coming in centrally into Dynamics and being processed. And of course, case management and the service module handle that very well. And the other aspect is for future student marketing. And so we're using Dynamics 365 and Click Dimensions, and sort of managing the whole marketing process through those two tools. And the whole thing's been done agile. Now agile is something I'd sort of played with on one or two projects before this. Generally, the projects went for a few weeks, and then it sort of finished. So it would go for a few sprints, maybe 5 sprints at most. But yeah, this has been 18 months. Initially, we were doing 2-week sprints. For those that aren't familiar with agile sprints, basically where you do a sort of a thrust of work for a period of time, and then at the end you sort of have something that you can release as something into production. So originally we were doing 2-week sprints, so I'd work for 2 weeks to achieve an end goal, achieve something that could be released into production. That was burning us out. That was quite intense, so we moved to 3-week sprints. And with the 3-week sprints, we've managed to keep that pace up basically all of this year. So we started 3-week sprints at the start of this year, and we've been doing 3-week sprints ever since. So we're certainly up into the 20s. I think we're up into the high 20s on the sprints now. So it's like sprint 26 or something on the sprint. But yeah, it's going really well. I'm really enjoying it. A different way of running a project.
That is really interesting. I've never heard of a project that big that's done that. I certainly have talked to people in the dynamics space who have been fans of agile approaches, for years, and have found different ways to apply it. But that's really does sound like one of the largest ones. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's plenty that will say outright, "Oh, you can't do agile for long periods of time. It's only good for short projects. It's only good for pure development projects." So the detractors say this. I was skeptical. I used to be quite skeptical of agile, but yeah, no, I'm sold. I'm sold. I'm sold on it as a way of implementing CRM and implementing software development. It's working really well, and the client's very happy.
Do you have any guidance or things you can point to about what you think made this project so successful using this approach as opposed to any other? Or do you think this is a pretty sort of extensible model for other projects?
Probably the key has been we've had a couple of really good, strong Scrum Masters.
Mm-hmm.
So people to manage the process. I think, and it's like CRM, right? So classic. So in the old days, people used to complain about CRM implementations and how CRM implementations failed, and generally it's because it wasn't managed well, wasn't governed well. That people didn't do training. There was various things you could point to why CRM projects fail. In the case of Agile, I think you need that strong Scrum Master to keep the process on track, to understand what the Agile process is, because there's an awful lot of flexibility within the framework. It doesn't define how you do things; it just gives you a sort of framework to do them in. So yeah, having that strong Scrum Master is definitely key to it. And then there's elements in Agile, which you don't see in a waterfall. So the client's got to be heavily involved. So often the client will say, "Oh, we want Agile," and they'll say, "No worries, okay. So you're going to have people dedicated to this project full time, working alongside us in the, when we do the configuration. Oh no, we can't possibly take them away from the business," and that's a recipe for disaster. They have to be as committed to being involved in the configuration as you are as a VAR. If they're not involved in it, it's not going to work. Similarly, there's got to be an awful lot of trust. They've got to trust you as a professional to be doing the right thing. While there's a lot of transparency in Agile, a lot of it is you just have to be left alone. There's reporting and documentation are not as much of a priority as Iron Waterfall. So there's got to be a level of trust that people are working hard and doing the right thing and not sort of bludging. Do you have that word in America?
Yeah,
bludging.
Yeah. Not bludgeoned.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Not bludging around.
Wait, do you mean like bludgeoned, like hitting someone over the head with a club? That kind of bludgeon?
No, bludging. I think it's an Australianism. Bludging means to not work
bludging.
hard.
Okay, no, I don't know that one.
like English say skiving off. I'm not sure what the word is in America. But I have this dictionary of words to translate when I speak to different people that speak English. But anyway, so yeah, they have to trust that you're working, basically.
Got it.
And so if you don't have that trust, if the clients can't commit resources to help guide the development team, if you don't have a strong Scrum Master, I think they're excellent ways to destroy an Agile project. But if you have those elements in place or some semblance of them, it works really well. I'm really happy with how the project's gone. Every 3 weeks, we're delivering new functionality. We're doing a little what's called a showcase, where we demonstrate the functionality to the wider group. They're very happy. They're getting the stuff that they need, right? They have the stuff that they want, which is sort of sitting on what they call the backlog, sitting on the back burner. But the stuff that they need immediately, they can get very rapidly, and they're very happy. And if we walked away tomorrow, they won't get everything they'd asked for, but they've got an awful lot of things and pretty much everything they need, which is great. It's the fact you can sort of turn the tap on and off like that is also a great asset to the Agile process.
As I understand it, one of the real benefits when Agile is really working is really fairly accurate estimates of what you can deliver, and you develop a really good understanding and predictability. Has that been the case?
It's sort of because in Agile they talk about points, right? So they say, if we do this story, it'll be so many points, and there's similar concepts in Waterfall, right? So that's going to be a big effort, and normally talking sort of hours and things in Waterfall. I can't say that we're always accurate with our estimations. I think that's just a nature of the beast. What you do have with Agile, though, is probably the key difference in this regard is with Waterfall, if your estimation's bad, then it's really bad and it affects an awful lot of functionality. If your estimation's bad in Agile, it affects 3 weeks of work. So if one element blows out and takes up the 3 weeks, okay, well, that's 3 weeks gone. But that's only 3 weeks. It's not, the entire 12 months, 24 months of development. So it manages the risk of that estimation better, I think, than what you could possibly do in Waterfall, where as you go along, things change, and therefore your estimations may have been based on certain assumptions which no longer apply. And so I think it manages it better in that regard.
I guess the one sort of big scenario in my mind that sticks out is it seems like it would be hard to tackle in Agile, and I haven't actually tried it. Would be sort of the organization that has some really significant chunk of capabilities that they need. It's like they need to like completely shut off one case management system and turn on another for a real broad set of a broad set of use cases that just can't they can't live until this big set of things is up and running, and that's just going to take a long time. Is there a way to handle that kind of scenario? Or does it? You know what I mean? Or does a company have to be willing to sort of like go out there with a smaller sort of minimalist thing first?
Agile makes the assumption that everything can be broken down into sort of atomic pieces. Every problem can be broken down into smaller problems, which are smaller than the size of the sprint, right? So smaller than, say, you can do every task can be broken down into a smaller task, which can be done in less than 3 weeks. So there's an inherent assumption, and I think it's fair to say, if this is a major piece of integration between, say, a CRM and an ERP system, and we've got to turn it off and on, then can we partially implement that? Can we do a 3-week sprint and do expenses but not do revenue or something in the accounting? And of course, you can't do that, right? You can't say we'll have the expenses going into one system and the revenue going into the other, and that should work fine. That's never going to happen. I think it's still you can still tackle it though. So because you don't have to release, just because you create at the end of each sprint, you create something that potentially could be released, but you're not compelled to release it. So again, if let's say it's that idea of an integration to an accounting system, so that's the biggest thing I could think of that you could probably take on, or to a payroll system or something like that. You could still tackle those individual elements. As long as you can break down, right? So today we are going to tackle expenses, and we're going to build the code, and we'll have it ready, and we'll test it. But we're not going to release it until we've also done accounts, until we've also done the warehousing, until we've done this, that, and the other. So in principle, now I haven't worked on a project where we've done this really, but in principle you could do it. We've done some. That being said, on this project we have done some significant data migration elements where we've had to bring in, say, the students' programs, so the students' study programs or their courses, etc. And that was a significant data migration or data integration piece that did cover multiple sprints. And so it was a case of, as long as you can, the rule of thumb is as long as you can break down the task into atomic units of some kind, then you can tackle it. And you don't have to release them. I think people think you have to release them as you do them, and you don't. So as long as you can sort of tackle one thing, then next sprint tackle another, and then release it all together, then you're fine. I think that's So I haven't come across one where we can't tackle it with Agile yet. No, with Agile yet.
Yeah, it makes sense. I can imagine it. Anything that gets a project team moving together with confidence in each other and fairly predictable sort of pace and so forth has got to be a good thing. Like you said, even if it's not actually releasing something to the actual customers every at the end of every sprint, at least at first. That certainly does make sense in theory. And that's really great to hear that that's gone so well. And I hope we can learn more about it in the future, because I think, as you said, it's ongoing.
But I'm a convert. I was a lot of the projects I'd worked before were waterfall. You do all the analysis up front. You say this is what we're going to build. You document it, and then you build it. And they were quite successful. There's no problem with those really. But just in terms of this rapid release of functionality, so that people. So for example, when we first started this project, in the first 8 weeks, we were tasked with doing a proof of concept for the student drop-in center where students had inquiries. They had an Oracle system they were using called ServiceNow, and they were saying, look, we down the track we want to get rid of it. The license is expensive, and we're hoping to swap it out with Dynamic. Could you build a proof of concept for us in a few sprints to see what it looks like? And so over a period of 8 weeks, we built this proof of concept, and because they were heavily involved, and because each sprint they could sort of see where the product was going, by the end of that 8 weeks, they said, you know what, this is production ready. Let's swap it out now. And so and we were going, hang on,
you're like, wait, what?
That's not what we were building. Hang on. But they were because they had so involved it, because they knew sort of the warts and all of what had been developed and where the functionality was and where the limits were. They could with confidence say, you know what, at the end of this 8 weeks, this is the system we're going to put in. And they swapped out their Oracle system, I think a lot earlier than they were initially anticipating, just based on this, what was originally a proof of concept, which became their production system in that 2-month period. So that's and you wouldn't get that with waterfall. There's no way you could deliver that rapidly in waterfall and sort of chop and change the direction as quickly, I don't think.
Yeah, that's really something. Yeah, it's hard to imagine anyone would even be thinking about it with a waterfall. That would maybe they wouldn't have even thought, oh yeah, let's turn this on and
Yeah,
I'd do
and
that
that's
real
what they
quick.
did. And we were nervous, and we said, I'm not sure that's the way to go, but they went for it, and it's worked out fine, which is great.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. Um, really interesting stuff. Well, I'm trying to think here. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add for before we wrap this up here? Anything else going on in the local community there in Sydney, or in your own work that's you want people to take note of?
In terms of the Salesforce analysis, Salesforce have done another quarterly report, another quarterly financial, so I'll probably be analyzing that at some point. So I'm about to go on a Christmas trip overseas, but I imagine there'll be some downtime during that. So yeah, I'll try and knock out a Salesforce financial report
Oh, sure, yeah,
um,
as people do.
after the Christmas turkey, sitting there sort of half asleep. I might knock out a
Yeah.
Salesforce financial. So is that we've just had the Tech Summit in Sydney, which is a Microsoft organised conference that's going around the world. So that's been I presented there on Flow, and that was a lot of fun. So if there's have a look in your local cities, I guess, and see if there's a Tech Summit coming up. They're a lot of fun. The CRM Saturday folk are piggybacking on the back of those in some cities now. So the Tech Summit will run, and then so it'll be like Wednesday to Friday, say. Then on the Saturday there might be a CRM Saturday. So it's certainly worth checking out. CRM Saturdays are great. It's got the MVPs presenting, lots of good stuff, lots of good knowledge. You know, the MVPs, these are people that their day job is working in CRM, and they charge a good hourly rate for it, and they go to these things like the CRM Saturdays, and basically you can pick their brains and effectively get free consulting out of them, and they're more than happy to do it, which is great. So if there's a CRM Saturday happening in your local city, check it out and try and get involved.
Yeah, those have been seem to really be picking up momentum, and I only hear good things about them. I think we were a sponsor on one of them recently, but I hope we can stay involved in that too. They seem to sell out quickly. Also, by the way, so if you do catch wind of one, I would say get signed up quickly, because sometimes they're small.
Yeah, and I'm not sure there's been too many in the US, but certainly Microsoft's working with the people that are organising it to get more of them in the USA.
Okay, yeah. The ones I've seen are in Europe, have been in Europe primarily.
Yeah, so I think we'll be seeing more of them in the US, which is great.
Yeah,
so
sure.
yeah, they're great little events, good events, good community events.
Awesome. Well, maybe I'm having this. I was actually just on an AX tip competition tip off, and it was different AX 365 AX tips, and I could imagine one just for Flow and 365 customer experience apps. If there's other real champions of the technology out there, maybe we'll have to get you on sometime down the road and show off your best ideas out there, and show our readers what you can do.
Happy to help.
Awesome. Well, Leon, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been fun. I'm glad we got a chance to do it. We made the time work and everything.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, as you say, the time zones make it a little friendly now for both of us, which is great.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good. I know you're sort of starting your day today. I'm sort of ending mine, but yeah, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Leon Tribe for joining me today. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.